Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Fixing Diablo 2. I know it sounds kind of presumptuous. I'm not saying that Diablo 2 is broken. In fact, I think Diablo 2 is one of the best made games that has ever existed. I do, however, feel like there are some lost sheep in the wilderness that need to be found and brought back into, the fold, so to speak. And what do I mean by lost sheep? Well, today we're going to be covering one of the lost sheep, or at least what I consider a lost sheep, and that is the charges and the chance to cast system. And for this reason, we really don't even need to go into the game at all, because, well, most of this is just technical information, and I kind of need to go over the technical information with you. So let's talk about this right now. So first off, charges fall into three categories. They are either useful, usually very useful. Like, for instance, I can give you some examples. Lower resistance charges on a wand. Amplify damage charges are actually pretty nice, too. Decrepify charges don't fall into this category because they're too short. Things like enchant charges from Demon Limb and so forth and so on. Like, there are definitely some charges that are useful. Another category is useless charges. Useless charges are things like level 1 teeth, or level 1 zeal charges, or, something really stupid along those lines. Things that don't really make a whole lot of sense, and they should probably never, ever, ever, ever in their entire existence roll on an item, because they are literally without use. Then there's the category that I like to call the too low level or too few charges, or both. This is basically a category that includes a large number of skills that could potentially be useful, but they're just way too low level to be useful. A good example is level 1 zeal charges. Level 1 zeal kind of seems like it might actually be a good, interesting thing if it were higher level, right? So if it was level, say, 6 zeal, which gets you 5 hits, then that's a little more interesting, right? But then on top of that, there's too few charges. So, how many zeals would you use within an hour? Like, because I think that's probably about how much you would need, is like enough charges to be able to use zeal for like a solid hour of gaming, right? And you basically get like 2 minutes, or maybe even that, like a minute of uses out of it. They're just too low, or the level is too low, and this is an issue. Chance to cast also falls into the same category, which is the same three categories, which is number one, the chance to cast is either useful, like, for instance, Decrepify on a Reaper's Toll, or it's useless, like, for instance, chance to cast, like a level 4 Blessed Hammer or something stupid like that, and you're just like, oh, well, actually, there is no chance to cast Blessed Hammer. There's a charge of Blessed Hammer that spawns on shields. But chance to cast, another good useless example is Nova. Not Frost Nova. Frost Nova is actually useful. But Nova itself, when it's on like boots and things like that, has no damage. It's like no damage whatsoever. It's like 20 if that. I think if we actually were to pull up a window and look up Nova, D2R, what you'll come up with is that Nova literally has basically no damage whatsoever, even up into the higher levels. You're talking about even at level 20, it's 131 to 188 damage. It's relatively useless. And most of the time when you get them, they're like level 2 Nova, which is 7 to 28 damage in a circle around you. Nova is not exactly the best skill in the world, and even fully synergized, it struggles a little bit unless you have the right equipment, the negative resistances that you need, and all the other things that go along with it. And it just seems rather silly to me to put Nova on items when, basically it's completely useless. On top of this, we also have things that are too low level to be useful, or they are too low of a percentage to be useful. A good example of this is something like level 1 Amplify Damage proc. Level 1 Amplify Damage has a relatively short duration, and although, like a 5% chance to get a level 1 amp can be useful occasionally, most of the time a 5% chance to get level 1 amp is not really going to be as useful as you think. It just doesn't go off enough. And on top of that, the amplified damage doesn't last long enough. And this is something else that we can look up really quickly. So if we were to type in amplified damage, D2R, we would get a list of the duration of the ability, which is really the only thing that the level dictates is duration and the range, right? So at level 1, it is a 2-yard radius, which basically means it hits like 1, maybe 2 monsters if they're like hugging each other. And it lasts for a total of 8 seconds, which honestly, by the time you actually get in there and start wailing on the monster once the amplified damage hits, 8 seconds isn't really a long amount of time. On top of that, because of the relatively low duration and the relatively low percent chance to proc it, you end up with, well, a lot of the times you just can't maintain that amplified damage on the target for any long period of time. So both of them fall into these odd categories of having things that are too low level or not useful at all. And for this purpose, and I don't mean to blind you all, but I'm going to have to, we're going to go over to Amazon Basin, and we're going to take a look at charges. So there's a lot of different charges within the game. First off, there's random charges. Random charges can spawn on basically any item in the game. And random charges are things that, like when you find a rare item, or even a blue item, you can get a specific level of something on that item, right? Magic Arrow is actually kind of a nice suffix because it could potentially come in useful for a high physical damage character that's using a bow. The only problem with this suffix is that, well, the only character that's really utilizing Magic Arrow, or high physical damage bows, is the Amazon itself. So it doesn't really quite work very well. It's kind of a meh one. On top of this, the highest that you can ever possibly get is a level 10 at 67 charges. 67 charges of Magic Arrow isn't really a lot. You could fire 67 charges at one monster and not kill it, depending on the monster. And it honestly would need to be a lot higher. This is one of the issues with things like Magic Arrow, and if we take a look at Magic Arrow, you can get an idea of what I'm talking about, is that Magic Arrow, although these numbers actually I think have been changed since because they buffed it up a little bit, but the percentage of the conversion and the attack rating are always going to increase depending on the level, and at level 10, I mean, it's not really a whole lot of conversion. For a character that's a non-ranged character, because this is usually what is utilizing something like this, Magic Arrow just doesn't make a lot of sense. And for similar reasons, Fire Arrow makes no sense, and Cold Arrow makes no sense. Both of these are in the useless category. Inner Sight is actually useful, but it barely spawns on hardly anything, circlets, amulets, and Amazon-specific items. And the really silly thing about this is that this is something that's in the charge system a lot, and it's something that has to be talked about, is a lot of the useful charges that you would be able to get good effect out of, for some reason, often seems to be tied to the same class that has the item. If I'm leveling an Amazon, I'm almost always grabbing Valkyrie, or at least Decoy. And if I'm grabbing Valkyrie or Decoy, then I have Inner Sight, right? So why specifically put the skills that would be useful to other characters on class-specific items so that those characters cannot get access to them? The most notable of this is things that actually you can get access to but are class-specific items, right? So like lower resistance charges on a wand, or for instance, life tap on a wand. The wands are supposed to be basically Necromancer only, but they're not. And as you can see, for the Necromancer to have charges on his equipment is the equivalent, same thing as the Paladin. The Paladin gets like Blessed Hammer charges on a shield. The Paladin already has Blessed Hammer, so why put charges on the shield? And then they're really low level charges at that, so then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Multi-shot is a really good one, but multi-shot could definitely be higher level and more charges. So one of the main issues with skills like this that are main attack skills, like Zeal or multi-shot, is the number of charges that they provide is relatively low, and this is an issue. Now, you can get up to level 8 on a missile weapon, if you're careful. But the problem with getting up to level 8 on a missile weapon is then you're tied to that missile weapon, and that is your main form of damage. So you are in a kind of a poopy situation of, let me use this crappy weapon just so I can have multi-shot. Now, multi-shot does also spawn on gloves, which is nice, but it's a relatively low-level version of only level 4, and as you can see, really low charges. It's only 30 charges. You'll run through an entire 30 charge limit in no time. Power Strike is absolutely stupid. I don't know why this one is even has charges, and this is probably one of the worst ones, the worst offenders. It just basically just don't even just delete this one from existence. In fact, for the most part, Fire Arrow, Cold Arrow, and Power Strike could be taken out completely, and no one would care. Exploding arrow charges don't really make a lot of sense when there's so many bows that offer free exploding arrows. This is not even a chance to cast or a charge ability. It is just simply a innate effect of many bows, and if you're going to be using a bow and you want exploding arrow, you're probably going to be using the bow that has exploding arrow, which the best one is the Demon Machine, a Jukonu, which can be upgraded to the Demon Crossbow. So again, exploding arrow could probably be removed with little to no effect on the charge system. Ice Arrow could probably stay because Ice Arrow does actually have an ice freezing effect, and it can be useful in pinch situations for just about anybody that has it. The main problem with this one, though, is where they decided to place it, which is missile weapons and gloves. Again, being tied to a specific missile weapon just for charges is not a good idea. Having them on the gloves is not a bad idea, but again, not very a high level. It's only a level 3 skill, and there's only 27 charges, so very low. Charge Strike, again, a similar situation to something like Exploding Arrow. If you're going to be building Lightning, you're probably going to be building Charge Strike, and if you have Charge Strike, then you're not going to want to use a crappy version of Charge Strike, which even the highest level version is only level 5. So again, this falls into the category of too low level to actually be useful for anybody, and this one could also be removed with absolutely no issue. Freezing Arrow actually has some very interesting uses that I found myself. One in particular is the Holy Freeze Paladin, utilizing the Freezing Arrow charges on a Holy Freeze Paladin to basically get free explosive damage. It actually works very well and very similarly to the way that the Exploding Arrow does on the Enchant Sorceress, or the Exploding Arrow does on the Strider, the Holy Fire Paladin. It's a very interesting combination. Again, though, only level 4, which is fine, though. Level doesn't matter for this one, but the number of charges is way too low. As you can see, it's like a common thread across all these, is that the charges are way too low, just in general. Another problem with charges is that they're really expensive to repair, which is also a big deal. Barbarian charges, bashing, stun, concentration, and Grimward. Like, pretty much all these are garbage. Bashing, stun, and concentration could go and nobody would care. I think maybe stun might be useful to some other characters, but it has to be, again, on a melee weapon, which isn't really a good choice. The only one that's really even useful is Grimward, if you don't want to invest points in Grimward. However, the really weird thing about this is that, well, most barbarians usually put 1 point in Find Item and 1 point in Find Potion. And so you're already right there. So if you really want Grimward this badly that you want to use Grimward charges, you could just use the actual ability. Just put 1 point into it and just use the actual ability. The only usefulness this might have is on other classes, but again, a similar issue is that it's too low level. So the 97 charges is actually sufficient for use. The real problem is the level 5 ability here is just way too low, and it just doesn't offer any kind of actual usefulness. You need one that's going to be a higher level than that, maybe like level 10 or level 15 or something, or level 12. I'm sure that you can find the correct balance. And this is the very interesting thing about all this, is that it would take time to go through every single charge skill and actually come out with the right levels and figure things out. You also have to take into account synergies. So, you wouldn't want to give like level 40 Grimward charges on an item, because then the Barbarian could just simply put points in the synergy, never put an item point in the actual skill itself, and just use the charges. Also, placement of where the charges are, like for instance, whether you can find them on gloves or weapons, or whether you can find them on an amulet or something like that. This is also important as well, because if it's in the wrong spot, nobody's ever going to use it. Like if it's on a weapon, chances of somebody using it like a weapon charge on a weapon is pretty slim. The thing is that like a lot of these abilities, like Zeal and maybe even Concentration or Stun, if you wanted to get some usefulness out of them, you're not going to gimp yourself by putting on a crappy weapon that has those charges. So I don't even know why they roll on weapons at all. They should take that away completely and let them roll on other things that might be useful. Rings, amulets, circlets, boots, gloves. There's a lot of different ways that you could potentially add in one of these charges into a character, but the problem is that this is not the right way. For the same reason that a lot of the times, if you guys watch my older videos about sets, I often would hail a set if it did not include a weapon and if it did not include a shield. And the reason is because more often than not, your shield and your weapon are very important to your character. And if you don't have a good shield and if you don't have a good weapon, you don't have a good character. And so gimping yourself with these weapons is a big issue. Going over Druids, Firestorm is absolutely stupid, and you would need full synergies to get any kind of damage out of this ability. It's a sucky ability, honestly. I've played Fire Druid entire season, and my opinion of Firestorm is very low. It's basically a melee attack for the most part. Does very little damage. It does 1/3 of what it actually states. On top of this, the other issue is that it's a spam ability. You spam it as fast as you possibly can. So again, we're back to the number of charges. 67 charges, even at level 10, is completely useless. So in my opinion, Firestorm falls into the useless category. Fissure is actually a surprisingly strong ability early on in the game, but it does require a lot of synergies, and it is something that you also spam, although it does have a little bit of a delay. But 56 charges is too few, and level 7 is way too low. Honestly, Fissure could probably be removed completely. The main issue that we have here with charges, and this is something that we kind of have to talk about, is that it's not just about useful, useless, and too low level / too few charges. It's also about usefulness as a skill. Okay? So let's think about it this way. Amplify damage is useful. Okay? Zeal is useful. Right? They're useful for different reasons. Amplify damage is useful because it provides a curse which increases the damage of all your physical abilities, right? Zeal is useful because it's a way to apply damage, right? It's not just a way to do damage, it's a way to take your damage and convert it into an application method. So it is an application method, not just simply an ability. And this is kind of the really important thing that you have to judge these by, is that Firestorm is nothing more than a fire ability. It has no other effect other than damage. So it has to be judged specifically by the damage that it outputs. And anything that is judged by the damage that it outputs, if it doesn't dish out a good enough damage, well, then it's useless. And that's basically how we have to think about this. Firestorm at this level, at level 10, at level 1, with 56 charges, with 67 charges, it doesn't matter. It's always going to be useless. Same thing with Fissure. Now, Twister, on the other hand, can be judged on a different category. So Twister is a micro stun. It is a small stun of like I think it's 4 seconds, I think is what it is, and it can be actually increased with synergies. But the thing with Twister is that now you're not judging it based entirely on its ability as a damage effect, right? It's not like Tornado. Tornado, believe it or not, as a charge, is useless. It's a completely useless charge because it has no other purpose other than damage. So you take Tornado out of the equation. Volcano has no other purpose other than damage. It's pretty. I mean, having some Volcano charges could be fun to just play around with, but for the most part, it's useless. Going through the Necromancers, Teeth, absolutely useless. Now, I do plan to cover Teeth, and I want to actually talk about how we can potentially fix Teeth and make Teeth into a useful ability. As of right now, Teeth is probably one of the most useless abilities in the game. I think it really only has like minor usefulness in PvP because obviously it can't be dodged with the like ridiculous number of teeth that you have. It's also a synergy of some of the more powerful skills in the game, so you end up beefing it up to maximum anyway. And but it's useless as a charge. absolutely useless. Dim Vision, great as a charge. It's utility, right? So having Dim Vision on a charge is always going to be good. Level 8 Dim Vision is absolutely great. 120 charges is absolutely great. This is a excellent charge, but where is it placed? Daggers, wands, and shrunken heads. Poor placement. This needs to be changed to something more like rings, amulets, circlets, maybe gloves, boots. There's a lot of different choices that you could potentially make, but these are terrible, and it should probably be removed from all of those, with the exception of maybe the wand and the dagger, but the shrunken head definitely, because the necromancer doesn't need it. Circlet and Ring, as you can see here, though, it is in Circlet and Ring, but it's only level 5 and 32 charges, which is much less useful. I would probably swap it and put the level 8 charges with the 120 on the Circlet and the Ring, and then call it a day. Weaken, one of the worst curses in the game that literally just gives negative physical damage. It's like off-weapon ED is basically how it calculates. It's terrible. This one would just be removed, in my opinion. It doesn't have any purpose whatsoever as a charge, and it doesn't have any purpose as a chance to cast, to be honest, either, because it just doesn't remove enough damage from a monster to be effective. The only thing that I can say for this curse that is actually kind of nice is that it removes damage from the monster before they hit you, which can be interesting in calculating damage for like energy shield and things like that. But for the most part, as a curse, it's absolutely inferior to Decrepify, which Decrepify just beats it hands down. The only thing that Weaken does better than Decrepify is duration. That's it, duration. And even then, at these low levels, the duration is not going to be all that great, because at level 8, on a dagger, wand, or shrunken head, which nobody's going to use, and at level 5 with 32 charges on a pair of gloves, nobody's probably going to want it on their gloves either. So it's really one of those ones that either needs to be removed or it needs to be buffed up significantly. And the other big problem with Weaken is that it's so bad because it takes the place of better curses. Poison Dagger, I don't even know why this one's actually a thing. I really don't understand why this one's a thing. The only class that's really ever going to use Poison Dagger is the Necromancer. And it's on Necromancer items. And if the Necromancer was actually using Poison Dagger, if he was actually going to use it, he would use the ability. He wouldn't use a charge. It's also on Circlet, Rings, and Gloves for the non-Necromancer characters. And very low level, though. Level 5 at 32. And it's so low level that quite possibly if you had any other monster, character, player, mercenary, whatever, applying poison damage to the target because of how poorly poison damage works, it just wouldn't do anything. Terror's fine. It's a utility skill. Absolutely fine. Confusion's fine. It's a utility skill. I might tweak like the level a little bit, maybe make it a little bit more useful. The real problem with Terror and Confusion is that Terror and Confusion and Dim Vision are all under the penalty of Hell difficulty and Nightmare difficulty. So in certain difficulties, you get less AI controlling effects. The higher difficulty it is, the worse the AI controlling effects duration it gets. So while the duration of Confusion, Terror, and Dim Vision might be decent in normal difficulty, even with like a level 5 charge, because of the reduction in Nightmare and Hell difficulty, these AI controlling effects like Terror, Confusion, and Dim Vision go down tremendously from these charges, which means that to actually make them useful, they've got to be high level. And it would be perfectly fine to require a high-level character to utilize these items. Like, say, a level, 15 Confusion ring, but it requires, like, say, level 85. That's fine. Life tap, nothing wrong with that. Life tap is literally ridiculous. The life tap charges have been used successfully, again, utility, killing Ubers and all sorts of things for a very long time. Bone Spear charges, absolutely useless. The only character that can get good use out of Bone Spear is the actual Necromancer. If he's building the synergies for Bone Spear, then he's probably building Bone Spear, and so having charges of Bone Spear is absolutely useless. And on top of this, it's primarily on Necromancer items. It's not high enough to actually be useful. At level 6, it's just terrible. Attract, absolutely excellent curse, needs to be higher level. The number of charges is fine. Attract is actually a absolutely killer curse for protecting yourself from damage from multiple targets. The main issue with it is that, well, it just doesn't, it's not high enough. It's only like level 2 on like a ring. It needs to be like circlet, amulet, and ring. It needs to be much higher. I would say like level 8 would be an acceptable level. Definitely need to beef that up. Lower resistance, I think is kind of fine the way it is. I'd like to see it on other items besides daggers, wands, shrunken heads, and staff. I like to limit the amount of like weapon swapping that you have to do. Specifically, we were talking about earlier about like not having to be tied to a crappy weapon just to get an effect. It would be nice if maybe they attached it to gloves, amulets, rings. It doesn't have to be a particularly high level. Just, it could even be the same as it is right now, which it's currently maxed out at level 3, which I think would be fine. Level 3 lower resist on like a ring or an amulet or something like that, or even just a circlet. It could be, meted out and you try and figure out exactly how you want to do it. But the thing is that these choices are terrible. Shrunken Head is absolutely terrible because that's the Necromancer. And if he wants lower resist, he's probably just going to put 1 point into it, or get a Shrunken Head that has +1 lower resistance, so he can avoid the entire thing and just get the free skill. So it doesn't make any sense why it's on Shrunken Heads. It really, honestly, shouldn't be on wands either, but that's just how we have it right now. Like if you want to get a lower resistance item, you pretty much just get a lower resistance wand or dagger. But it should be somewhere else. And if they put it somewhere else, they could remove the wand, the dagger, and the Shrunken Head for all I care, as long as they put it on something else that's useful. Poison Nova, absolutely useless. I don't know what you would ever utilize it for, except for maybe trying to arrest regeneration on a caster class. But Poison Nova's duration is so low, what is it, like 2 seconds, that it's not really going to help you arrest regeneration all that much unless you can spam it. And even at 82 charges on a dagger, wand, or shrunken head, it's not really going to be all that amazing. And the only other place you can get it is a pair of gloves with 22 charges, which means you're not going to be able to spam it. 22 charges times 2 seconds a charge means that you're going to be able to hold down that button. Even if you met it out at 2 seconds per charge, you're still only going to get, 44 seconds? So 44 seconds of Poison Nova. It's not going to be all that much. Bone Spirit, another one that's absolutely useless. It has absolutely no purpose outside of the Necromancer itself, using the synergies. And on top of that, even on the Necromancer, if you were building Bone Spirit, you would use Bone Spirit, not the Bone Spirit charges. So this one also could be removed. Paladin skills. Sacrifice. Could be moderately useful on just about any non-melee class that might just simply want a melee skill to use instead of just regular attack. But again, the charges are too low. The level doesn't really matter here too much. It could be level 5 or level 10. As long as it's not like level 1, it should be okay. And I still wouldn't use this, though, which in my opinion means it could just simply be removed. Another issue here, though, is that, as you can see, it only spawns on scepters, shields, and melee weapons. And this means that you would be tied to a specific weapon to utilize sacrifice, which is not good. Again, remove the weapon choices. Holy Bolt. Charges of Holy Bolt are absolutely useless. Chance to cast of Holy Bolt I found usefulness for, but charges of Holy Bolt are basically completely useless. They don't do hardly anything. They don't heal much. They don't do much damage. Without the synergies, they're essentially completely useless. And if you have built the synergies for Holy Bolt, you probably have a way better Holy Bolt that you can cast on your Paladin. And casting it on a non-Paladin, completely useless. Zeal. This skill right here actually would be really useful if it just had a high enough level. It doesn't need to be like level 1 trillion. All it needs to be is like, I think, level 6? I can't remember precisely off the top of my head whether it's level 5 or level 6 where Zeal gets its 5th hit. But once it gets its 5th hit, that's pretty much all you need to make this ability useful. And it does get its 5th hit on, let's see here. Number of hits 2 to 5 on Zeal level 4. So all it needs is level 4. So level 4 Zeal would be enough to work properly. The problem is the number of hits. You need a large number of hits to actually be able to dish out damage with Zeal. Zeal is a melee ability. It is a spamming ability. It is something you are going to spam on a regular basis. Like this number of 45 at level 4, that's not even one fight. You couldn't even kill Diablo with that many Zeals. I bet you Diablo probably would not die before you ran out of charges. So what do you do here? Well, it needs to have a lot more charges. If you're going to actually try and make this useful, it would probably need somewhere like 300 to 500 charges to actually be useful. I would say more in the 500 range to actually be useful to a character. And, you know, it may have a hefty cost of repairing it, or there might be some other thing going on, but it needs to be way more than that. It's also, as you can see, it's only on scepters, shields, and melee weapons. Again, they're tying you to a crappy weapon, which, again, makes it difficult. Vengeance. Vengeance doesn't even need to be a skill. Without the synergies, it's useless. It's too slow. Zeal is way better. Sacrifice is way better than Vengeance. Without synergies, without actually getting a high-level Vengeance, this one could be removed. Blessed Hammer could also be removed from a charge. This doesn't need to be on there. It just ruins shields. There's absolutely no reason for Blessed Hammer. It would never be high enough to overcome the level that the actual Blessed Hammer Paladin actually has access to. And on top of that, the main issue with this is that any other character that would want to use Blessed Hammer as a charge can't, because it doesn't do enough damage. It's just absolutely worthless. It's like level 5. What is it at best? It's like level 7. No, level 6 on a scepter or a shield, and only level 3 on a hammer. And level 6 Blessed Hammer does basically no damage without synergies whatsoever. It's worthless. Sorceresses, Firebolt, absolutely useless charge. Charged Bolt, absolutely useless. These are judged entirely by their damage output. They have no utility. It doesn't matter what level they are, because you're not going to be able to get good enough damage from them no matter what. Charge Bolt does basically no damage without synergies, and Firebolt does no damage without synergies, and even with synergies, Firebolt doesn't do very good damage and is outclassed by Fireball. The only thing Firebolt has going for it is its mana cost consumption, and the mana cost consumption does not shine through as a charge. Ice Bolt, again, could be completely deleted. Nobody cares about that. Telekinesis is actually useful. It's utility. Perhaps maybe bump up the number of charges. Nothing too fancy there. Frost Nova as a charge is actually kind of interesting because of the cold length duration. It actually does provide utility. So in a pinch, it could be useful on any character, depending on which ones. And the level, honestly, doesn't matter, because the damage of the ability is so low that even if you were to have like level 20 Frost Nova as a charge, it's not going to matter, because level 20 Frost Nova as a charge does a whole 56 cold damage minimum and 67.5 cold damage maximum. And even if you were a sorceress and fully synergized Frost Nova, it still wouldn't be useful, because you would actually just cast the Frost Nova ability, not the other way around. Ice Blast, I mean, it's not really that much more useful than Frost Nova, but it does freeze targets. Main problem here is that it's on orbs and staffs, which makes it pretty much useless. Same problem for Frost Nova is that, as you can see, it's orbs and staffs. So to get like a decent version, you do need a higher level version of Frost Nova to get a high chill duration. But it does spawn on circlets, amulets, and daggers. Not really sure anybody would actually want to use an amulet with Frost Nova charges, but I mean, it is what it is. Fireball, it's completely damage based, so absolutely useless and could be removed. Nova, completely damage based, absolutely useless and could be removed. Lightning, also could be removed. Now, enchantment, this is actually super useful, but the rolls on it are so low that they are outclassed by Demon Limb and any other enchantment source, including the enchantment Merc. And this is definitely something I'd like to see get beefed up a little bit, because enchant is absolutely amazing. It's just not amazing as a charge because, well, you get basically level 3 with 27 charges. It's useless. Give it something a little bit higher than that. Make it actually roll, where you might actually look for it and be excited to have it on an item, because this is not it. And if it stays this way, you might as well just remove this. Chain Lightning, again, completely damage based. You might as well remove it as a charge. As a chance to cast is actually mildly useful, but as a charge, it's useless. Teleportation as a charge, useful. Number of charges could definitely be increased. I like the Circlet and Amulet options. Orb and Staff are terrible, but I mean, they could stay in the game just because whatever. People still use them. They buy those early on in the game. But honestly, Circlet and Amulet are superior because you don't have to swap weapons, and it doesn't consume your weapon swap with, something stupid like a Tele Staff. On top of that, if you're like a Paladin or anything like that, and you swap to a staff, well, you've lost all your defensiveness from swapping off your shield, which is also not good. Glacial Spike charges are actually useful because they freeze a large group of monsters. But again, as you can see here, bad choices for actually usefulness. Dagger, Staff, and Orb are not really good options. I'd like to see that on something else like Gloves or Amulet or Circlet, or there's a lot of other choices, but these choices are not it. Meteor, completely damage based, so not useful. Blizzard actually has some mild utility, but for the most part is outclassed, I think, by Frozen Orb in the same regard. It kind of depends on what you're doing here, but both of these can be useful by utility for specifically their ability to chill targets. However, I do believe that Frost Nova is actually superior at chilling targets. So, I don't know. But same thing again. Look, Dagger, Orb, Staff, Dagger, Orb, Staff, Dagger, Orb, Staff, Club, Dagger, Orb, Staff, Club. All these are terrible. They're on terrible choices, and so you're going to barely ever touch them on these random affixes. Now, moving off of the random affixes, we're going to be talking about the unique items. So the unique items are different, and these are ones that have specific effects, and they can either be useful or not useful depending on what's going on. Right? Slow missiles, useful. Plague Javelin, useless. It doesn't have basically any purpose whatsoever on Gargoyle's Bite. If you're utilizing Gargoyle's Bite on an Amazon and you want Plague Javelin, you're probably going to use it. If you have Plague Javelin, you're going to use it. If you're not building the synergies for Plague Javelin, you're probably not going to use it. The only usefulness I could even ever think that this might actually come in handy for is on a Throw Barb, just simply to arrest regeneration, not actually for damage, but just to poison the target. And honestly, you could do the same thing with a really nice poison charm. Immolation Arrow is pretty useless. Unless you're actually building synergies for this, it's useless. The Explosion is kind of okay, I guess, but it's on like one of the slowest crossbows in existence. And another problem with this is that, well, again, it's a very similar situation of it's a bow skill. If the Amazon is utilizing Exploding Arrow and Immolation Arrow, they're not going to want this. Which means that this has to look attractive to a non-Amazon. And level 18 is pretty high, but without synergies, it's going to do nothing. So, I don't know. I don't think this one is really worth it either. This could be replaced with like a bunch of other things. I don't really know. Enchant would honestly probably be better than Immolation Arrow. Exploding Arrow as an actual effect on the bow would probably be better. Immolation Arrow as an effect on the bow would be better. Just simply giving the bow an innate effect as opposed to forcing you to fire charges would probably be better than how it's set up right now. And that would be just something that you would change innately, just making this into, say, like bow fires Immolation Arrows. And then some people might actually want to check out Hellrack Colossus crossbow then. Assassin skill, Cloak of Shadows is really useful because of the way that it reduces the vision of all the monsters around you, increases your defense. There's a lot of different things for it. It's a good level. Cloak of Shadows itself needs to be touched on as a skill, and that's a different video, but the ability itself is actually pretty good in both of these scenarios, the Darkside Bassinet Helm and the Nadir Helm. Venom is a very nice thing to either have charges of or chance to cast. It doesn't matter. It does have a relatively short duration, though, in low levels. And so these level 3 charges are actually pretty useless, especially comparatively to something like Treachery, which is level 15. One thing I would like to see with this one is just simply raise the levels. Number 2, Grimoire. Again, we covered that earlier. Grimoire doesn't really have a lot of usefulness outside of the Barbarian. But if you were to use it outside the Barbarian, I don't know why they would tie it specifically to a wand. Again, there seems to be some sort of issue here with the charges where they kept putting the charges, for specific skills on class items for those specific classes. And then like in this case with the Barbarian skill being on a Necromancer wand, they're assuming that the Necromancer is going to cast it. But the Black Hand Key is not a very good wand. It's tied to a weapon. And, well, a lot of Necromancers are never going to use the turd wand. It looks like a turd. Like, it actually physically looks like a turd in your inventory. Ravens, completely useless. If you're a Necromancer, if you're a Druid, you're going to be using them. You just summon them yourself. As charges, they don't really make a lot of sense because they're too low level and they die based on the number of hits that they have. It is kind of nice for the free blind effect, I will say. Let me rescind my completely useless statement because they do actually work properly for blinding things. So as a utility skill, but not as a damage skill. Recently they actually patched these so they actually work. So if you put them on and you summon the monsters, or they actually stay. They didn't used to stay, but again they're tied to weapons, which I believe is a problem because being tied to a weapon means that when you weapon swap they all disappear, which is not good. Either they need to figure out a way so that swapping your weapons doesn't immediately cause them to disappear. Maybe put them on a delay of like 30 seconds or something before they disappear, so that you're like if you swap between weapon sets, they won't just immediately poof. Or put them on something else other than these crappy items. Cranebeak, Warspike, nobody uses, and Heart of the Oak is a swap item. Is an item that often gets swapped with your like CTA and stuff like that. So they're both weapons, and what happens is you put your Hodo on, and then on the other hand you've got your CTA. You swap over, and then you lose it, right? Carrion Wind has Poison Creeper, which is useful for arresting regeneration. Firestorm is not useful. Oak Sage is mildly useful, but the problem with these sages is that, well, they have really low level. They're all really low level. They're 2, 4, and 5, which means they die all the time. If they bump the level of these up a little bit, or maybe they just made them more tanky in general and left the level alone, it would be better. But for the most part, they're almost completely useless due to the fact that they die all the time. So again, we have some charges that aren't really all that useful. Number 2, let's see, Summon Spirit Wolf, pretty much completely useless. Molten Boulder, completely useless. Cyclone Armor, actually useful. Cyclone Armor is actually useful. However, it's on the Infinity Polearm, again tied to a weapon. The number of charges is actually relatively low at 30. This is something that you're going to want to spam cast as necessary. Whenever you're in danger, you don't just cast it once and then move on, because it doesn't absorb that much without synergies. And even with synergies, it still needs to be cast all the time, and 30 charges isn't enough. They need to beef up the number of charges on this quite a bit. I would say to 120 or higher. And then on top of that, Cyclone Armor itself, I feel like it should go on some other stuff besides just a weapon. It could be an interesting chase effect for an amulet or a circlet or something. Oh yeah, I finally got that really godlike circlet, and it has, level 21 Cyclone Armor charges, which is great. Heart of the Wolverine, same thing as before. Too low level to be useful. The Oath is the only one that's actually useful, and the irony of the Oath is that Oath is a item that you make in an ethereal base, which means that the charges are basically completely useless, because for the most part you make it in the ethereal base, use up all the charges, and then that's it. Now you just don't get any more. 20 charges is also really low. Honestly, for Oath, I would say to increase the number of charges by at least 100 to 120, because anybody who's making Oath is probably making it in an ethereal base, and they're not going to want to use the charges if it's only 20 of them, because they're never going to be able to repair it after they use the charges. Summon Direwolf, absolutely useless, really. I mean, honestly, the Summon Spirit Wolf and the Summon Direwolf are just way too low level to be useful, especially without any kind of synergies. On the Druid, if you were actually going to do that, you could just put 1 point in them and have synergies in like the entire tree down to the bear, for a total of what, like 5 points. And those that you summon with your plus to skills and whatnot will be more powerful than the Summon Spirit Wolf and the Direwolf here. The only usefulness that I can think of for the Summon Direwolf and the Summon Spirit Wolf is PvP related, to basically offer additional targets to hit. Like, for instance, if you're fighting a Necromancer, you could potentially get like a little army going of Summon Spirit Wolves and stuff, just specifically for the purposes of intercepting the occasional hit of like Bone Spirits, or, you know, like I think Frozen Orb also, you know, like gets eaten up by allies and things like that. So if you're fighting somebody like that in PvP, these can be mildly useful, but for the most part, they're not, and they're also tied to weapons. So Summon Spirit Wolf is tied to the Crescent Moon, and Summon Dire Wolf is tied to the Wolf Howl Fury Visor, which is very, very specific to a very, very specific build. It's not something that you're going to be utilizing very often. And then it's a nice little addition, I guess, to the Barbarian's little build. In general, though, if they were going to keep that, increase the number of charges. Same thing for the Summon Spirit Wolf on the Crescent Moon. Just increase the number of charges. If you're gonna make them weak, they need to be plentiful. If you're gonna make them strong, they can be less plentiful, which is an issue. Twister, as we talked about earlier, very nice to have on as a charge, because it does stun things. However, this is tied to the wind melee weapon, which nobody makes, and also just it's a weapon, which is another issue. Volcano, bad. Spirit of the Barbs is actually pretty good. I'd like it to be a higher level, or just him to be tankier in general. And Summon Grizzly actually can be kind of useful, because he's very tanky in Hell difficulty. Even at a low level, he can actually still be a relatively nice little tank, but it's only 5 charges on it, and that's not really a whole lot. It is an issue with stuff like that, because if you're using him as a tank, that means he's probably going to die, and if he dies a lot, well, you're going to burn through those 5 charges pretty quick. Having more charges on there would definitely be nice. Necromancer amplified damage charges are obviously good, but as we talked about earlier, really low level versions of them don't really help much. The Gavel of Pain Martel Defer has 3 whole charges of level 8. 3 is really not a lot. I see what they're doing here, and I understand it, but, I mean, I would bring that up to, like, at least, I know they're trying to be stingy with the charges deliberately, but I would bring that up to, like, 9, at least, even if you're being stingy, because, honestly, a lot of the times you'll miss the freaking amplify damage because the monsters are moving, or the short duration will make it so that you get very little actual usefulness out of it. It's also a weapon, which means you're tied to the Gavel of Pain Martyr Defer to actually get this curse, which means you actually have to have the stats and everything else. So there's no reason to tie the person down to 3 charges there. It's actually kind of bad. Weaken. Again, we were talking about Weaken earlier. It's a terrible curse. There are better curses. It overwrites other curses that are better than it, like Decrepify, Amplify Damage, Lower Resistance, the whole lot. It's a bad curse. I think it's one of the worst curses on the curse tree, and it's actually kind of crazy because Weaken is literally, I think, the only curse on the curse tree that is completely useless. All the rest of the curses are actually pretty useful. Corpse Explosion charges are actually pretty useful. They need to be higher level. The damage of the Corpse Explosion isn't really tied to the level. It's the range of the Corpse Explosion. And Corpse Explosion, honestly, is a very powerful skill that can definitely see a lot of usefulness. But the level of the ability needs to be higher, so it hits more targets. And the number of charges offered need to be higher. This is also a thing. Clay Golem is on stone, and that is actually excellent. It's on a body armor. It's in a good place. It's a decent little runeword. It's not a bad runeword. And it gives you a free Clay Golem. The Clay Golem is actually surprisingly useful. Very, very good charges. Iron Maiden is not really as useful, but that's really just because there's a problem with thorns, and thorns needs to be fixed. So the Iron Maiden that you get on Metal Grid and Rift, not really all that amazing. But the main issue with Iron Maiden is that, well, it consumes, again, other more useful curses. It's not as useless as Weaken, but it's still pretty bad. And it didn't always used to be that way, and that's one of the things that I will be covering is Thorns. We're going to talk about Thorns in another video. Life Tap is absolutely amazing no matter what it comes from. As you see, Mirror Walk Boots, great. Poison Explosion is a terrible skill. It's not necessarily that it's terrible to have charges of it, but it's just a terrible skill and it needs to be addressed. Poison Explosion just needs to be addressed in general as a skill. Blood Golem, mildly useful. Unfortunately, it's all tied to weapons. Again, tying kind of cool skills like this to weapons is stupid. As you can see, Corpse Explosion being tied to Corpseborn Breastplate is actually kind of nice. Clay Golem being tied to Stone Body Armor is kind of nice, right? But Blood Golem being tied to 2 weapons is kind of stupid. Especially since Death, again, is an ethereal item, which makes this useless. It's one of those ones that's almost always made ethereal, and it's almost always, it's an indestructible ethereal item, right? So you don't make a non-ethereal Death, which means that you pretty much never utilize the Blood Golem. In fact, the Blood Golem on Death would be better converted into a chance to cast or given a large number of actual charges. Same thing with Oath that we were talking about earlier, is that Oath also has something on it that really can't be used because it's mainly made in ethereal bases, right? So in this case, the Heart of the Wolverine on Oath might be better off as a chance to cast. And moving on, we've got Attract. Attract is absolutely excellent as a charge. It is very useful in clutch situations to save your life. If you're ever surrounded as a melee character or as a mage, it doesn't matter. You cast Attract in the middle of the group, and all the monsters will start attacking the monster that you have attracted and give you a chance to escape. Attract also doesn't have the same problem that Iron Maiden and Weaken do, which is that basically it is non-overwritable, and it does not overwrite other curses because it only affects one monster, which means that you can use Attract with other curses. So you can go into a group, you can attract one monster and then amplify damage the rest. Amplify damage will not overwrite Attract, and Attract will stay on that one monster and that one monster only. And then later on you can cast Attract again, and it will overwrite one amplify damage monster but leave the rest intact. It is a very effective skill and a very effective charge. Decrepify charges, very useless in my opinion because of their short duration, and Decrepify's duration does not really go up very much. So Decrepify charges tend to be on the more useless side. It's a little difficult to get good usefulness out of Decrepify because, number one, of its relatively low duration. And in fact, to kind of like exemplify this, let me pull up Decrepify real quick. And we're going to take a look at this. Duration. So Decrepify's duration is 4 seconds at level 1, 4.6 at level 2, 5.2 at level 3. So what is this Decrepify? It is level 3, right? Which means it lasts for a whole 5.2 seconds, which means that by the time you cast it, it's already like 4 seconds is all you've got to do anything. It's not as good as Amplify damage in terms of the damage output that it does. It requires spam casting to keep it on the target, and the slow effect that it has, although it's mildly useful, is just not the greatest. In my opinion, Spell Steal would be better off changed. Well, I mean, honestly, the Spell Steal is just kind of an amazing item all on its own because it has Teleport and Decrepify and all this other stuff. But I'd like to see it changed to Amp, to be perfectly honest. I think Spell Steal being changed to Amp would be a good play. It would make Spell Steal more useful on the whole, and Decrepify just doesn't really fit very well with this particular item. Or charges in general. It fits much better with chance to cast, like Reaper's Toll, because you can spam it. If you can spam it, you can maintain it. If you can maintain it, it works well. If you can't maintain it, it doesn't work well. Spell Steal, Decrepify charges are basically in that ballpark. Bone Prison. Bone Prison is very useful on Mirrorwalk Boots. Absolutely excellent. Good level, good number of charges. It's very useful. They increased the level to a really high amount so that you didn't need very many. And this is what I was talking about earlier, is that as you increase the level, you can decrease the charges, but as you decrease the level, you have to increase the charges. So for something like Bone Prison, if they gave you like level 1 Bone Prison, they would need to give you like 300 charges because you'd be spamming that thing. But since it's level 33 and it actually has a little bit of HP, it can actually last. Level 13 or 13 charges is actually fine. Again, we're back to Oath on the Iron Golem, and Oath with the Iron Golem. Again, not really all that useful because, again, Oath is generally made in ethereal items. I had forgotten that Oath had both the Blood Golem and the Iron Golem. I mean, maybe they could both be chance to cast, or maybe you could just increase the number of charges so that you could actually utilize them on the ethereal item. I mean, obviously, you're eventually always going to run out, but 14 charges on an ethereal item that can't be repaired is terrible. Metal Grid Amulet has it as well, and the Metal Grid Amulet is a good option. It's level 22. The main issue with Metal Grid Amulet, though, is that it summons an Iron Golem that is unfortunately very weak. One thing that Metal Grid could do, and this is a small change to Metal Grid itself, is maybe it could give you like level 5 summon resistance as a O skill. This would allow the Iron Golem to perform his duties better and be less, terrible. In fact, it could give you like level 5 summon resistance and level 5 like iron or summon Golem Mastery. So like level 5 summon resistance and level 5 Golem Mastery, and you'd have a halfway decent Iron Golem at that point. As it is right now, the only character that can really get good use out of Metal Grid, besides Necromancer, which wouldn't do that because he would just cast Iron Golem himself, but the only character that can is Barbarian, really, because the Barbarian can use the shouts to beef up the Iron Golem and make him tougher, stronger, give him more defense and all that other stuff, which is most characters cannot do. And honestly, this just needs the Metal Grid Amulet just needs a little bit of work to make the Iron Golem better. It doesn't need any other changes to it because Metal Grid Amulet is amazing. Poison Nova on Venom. Venom's a bad weapon anyway, and Poison Nova is not useful as a charge. It would be much better as a chance to cast. Revive, absolutely excellent because it's utility, right? The duration of revives suck. This is unfortunate. But the number of revives is tied to the level. So as you can see, Harmony has level 20, so you get a lot of revives. Level 8 on Eternity isn't as many revives, and so it's less useful. But as you can see, they give you 88 charges. So this is a very similar situation where they give you more for less. But the problem with this is because the duration of the revives doesn't go up with level, they shouldn't do that. And the Harmony missile weapon should probably still have about the same amount as Eternity. And also Bloodraven's Charge, which is a really high-level item, by the way, should probably be set up more like the Harmony missile weapon so that somebody might actually want to use it. Because if you compare the two and you actually look at how they work, if you're going to just do revives, you're going to use the Harmony missile weapon, not Bloodraven's Charge. And Bloodraven's Charge kind of has no purpose if it's not being used for that. So that needs to be changed. Holy Bolt charges, again, completely useless for the most part. They don't really have much purpose. I don't really see any reason to have Holy Bolt charges at all. The Sorceress skills, we're at the last part of these charge abilities. I'm almost gone for an hour already. Nova, again, useless. Firewall, pretty much useless. Enchant, actually useful, right? Chain Lightning, useless. Teleport, useful. Meteor, useless. Blizzard, mildly okay, useful. The level is actually quite decent here, but the level of the item is 68. So by the time you hit 68, level 16 Blizzard isn't going to do all that much. But 12 charges is really low. That needs to be like quadrupled, if not more. Hydra, completely useless. Does not have any purpose whatsoever. Even on the Hellfire Torch, that level 30 Hydra is completely useless. Even if you have full synergies, that Hydra still is completely useless, because if you're a Sorceress and you have full synergies, you're just going to cast your own Hydra. Frozen Orb is actually useful. The Sure Frost Flange Mace is actually well positioned. I wish it had a little bit more, maybe like 100 charges. But for the most part, it's actually not bad for its level. The main issue that I find with this is that, well, and a lot of this stuff is that they don't scale with level. And this could be something that we could talk about as well. So very quickly, we've just finished going over all of the charges. Charges might be better off scaling with level. It could be an interesting thing to allow the charges to scale with level based on the character's level that you're playing on. So if I have a Churchill Frost and I'm level 99, then it would be a lot higher than level 9 charge. The only caveat here, and I would make this very clear right off the bat, is that because of synergies, scaling the charges with level would not be a good idea because a character with synergies might get very good use out of those charges. So I would say that it scales with level, except for the actual class that has the skill. So very much similar to O skills, where O skills can give you like 20 to a skill, right? Like 20 to fireball or something like that. But when you're on the sorceress, it only gives you 3, right? Or is it 3 or 2? I can't remember which. But, you see what I'm saying, is that like it'll scale for everybody but the character that actually has the skill. Moving on from charges, let's also talk about the actual regeneration of the charges. So the charges themselves need to have a better way to be regenerated. This is something that is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts when it comes to charges, and why they don't use them is it comes down to money. Money. Some of the charges just cost way too much money to repair, and they are so expensive that nobody in their right mind would ever touch them, because they know that utilizing those charges on a regular basis can literally equal like the death of your wallet. Especially if the item is a superior item, because the charges just cost too much to repair. One thing that they need to do with the charge system is they need to provide some other way to repair charges besides just simply repairing them. Give us a Horadric cube recipe that can recharge an item that's not ridiculously difficult to do. The one that we have right now requires chip gems, and chip gems, well, are kind of difficult to hang on to, as well as flaweds. It is a specific recipe that just kind of is a pain in the butt. It also doesn't work on items that are not broken. So one of the problems is that if I wanted to use the repair recipe to recharge a weapon, that's fine. But if I use the the recipe to recharge, say, Metal Grid, I can't do it. Metal Grid doesn't actually work with the recipe because it's not a weapon or an armor, which is another one of the many issues. So let's see here real quick. Let's go ahead and cast all our Iron Maidens real quick, just as an example. We're going to burn through all 20 of our Iron Maidens, and that's just the Iron Maidens, of course. We didn't go through the Metal Grid Iron Golems, because that would take some time.
Good day.
And as you can see, my amulet requires 98,526 to repair those 20 charges. They really got to work on, number one, the amount to repair the charges and the number of charges. Like, for instance, if that was 98,000 to repair, say, 80 charges, I'd be a little bit more amiable. But since it's 98,000 to repair 20 charges, it's a lot less good. And this is an example of something that's actually not particularly expensive. If I were to get something that was particularly expensive, like, for instance, let's go ahead and buy some weapons here real quick, so that we can make like 22 iron golems. Because if I remember correctly, the iron golems are much more expensive. Because the iron golem charges, just they're higher level. And one of the things that goes on with charges is that the higher the level of the charge, the worse it gets. So it just gets worse and worse and worse until basically there's the amount that it costs can actually exceed greatly how much money you actually have in your bank account. So I need one more. Oh, I got one more. Okay, there we go.
Not here. Not here.
So there you go. Now I am completely out of charges. Will you stop chewing on my shirt? Or are you chewing on the key? You chewing on the key. Okay. Nimoy's being a poop face. Why are you being a poop face? Don't be poop face. All right, let's cast off the Iron Maiden again. We're just going to get all these out just to kind of show you how ridiculous it is to actually burn all the charges. And, thanks to the infinite gold glitch video that I have up, if you guys check that out, you can probably repair everything just fine these days. But as you can see here, though, now it costs me 370,142 to repair this amulet. So expensive. It's very expensive to repair charges, and the higher level the charges are, the more charges that there are, the worse it gets. So one thing that they definitely have to do is they definitely need to work on the number of charges as well as the repair cost and balance it out more properly, as well as maybe give us a few more ways to restore charges. Specifically, they could invent an item within the game that allows us to restore charges. Give us more cube recipes so that we can restore charges on things besides weapons and armors, like when we have a ring or an amulet that has charges, and we can repair the charges on that. Also fix the recharge recipe so that it actually repairs charges when you put an item in that is not broken. So when it comes to weapons and armor, a weapon and armor have durability, and the repair recipe is trying to repair the weapon or armor durability. Well, if there's no durability missing from the item, you can't use the repair recipe to restore the charges on the item until it takes at least 1 durability of damage. It's a bug that's been in the game for a long time, because you should be able to repair the charges on the item no matter what. Or honestly, just separate out the recipe into 2 different recipes, allowing us to recharge the charges on any item with a different recipe. Like, for instance, when you repair an item, it takes a Ral or an Ort rune. When you repair an item with charges, it takes a Chippy or a Flawed. Just allow us to take a Chippy or a Flawed, or even bring it up to like a Perfect or something. It doesn't really matter. And make it so that we put just that gem in there with the item to recharge it to get more, charges. Moving on to the next topic, and this is very similar, is chance to cast. And the reason why I wanted to cover these together, although now I'm regretting it because it's been an hour of me talking about charges. The reason why I want to talk about these together is because, well, they're practically the same. Mr. Nimoy, will you quit it? Quit it. Now, chance to cast is actually one of those things that's actually more useful because, as we talked about earlier with charges, things that need to be spammed can be spammed more easily with chance to cast, and that makes them more useful. So, for instance, like slow missiles that you might not actually cast with charges, like Fade, Mind Blast. I'm not really sure Mind Blast makes for a very good chance to cast, but it's okay. There's tons of different chance to casts, though. There's Wind Struck, there's On Striking, there's On Attack. And I'm going to save you guys a lot of trouble by not going over all these individually because we can talk about these pretty much the same way, is that any of these abilities, similarly to the charges, if they are not useful outside of damage, and they do basically no damage, then they're useless. Very similarly to the way that the charges are useless in that regard. So if we were to go over some of the chance to casts, chance to cast Firebolt is pointless. Ice Bolt, pointless. Lightning and Chain Lightning are actually kind of mildly useful depending on what's going on. You can make like melee sorceresses and stuff and like actually have synergies built into things like this. The level of it is very low, though. Extremely low. And because it's so low, it's basically completely useless. Same thing for Nova. Nova's completely useless because of its relatively low level and low damage. It's on a freaking Destruction polearm, one of the most expensive items in the game, and you've got, level 22 Nova, and the level 22 Nova is still pretty much useless because it does basically no damage. Honestly, they'd have to beef that up to like level 44 to actually make it useful, or increase the chance to cast, but then it would just get spammy. Most of these things are like this. On attack, on striking. It basically comes down to, is it actually useful this way? This skill right here, the chance to cast the Valkyrie, They need to turn this into charges. I'm tired of hearing that girl pop up every 5 seconds. I mean, it's kind of nice that it's automatic. Don't get me wrong, but if you're on a character that attacks really fast, that jank can be like it just doesn't end. She'll just constantly come down. 2% chance my butthole. Like literally, she will just spam cast. It's absolutely insane. The venom ability is it's a like okay it could be a charge, it could be a chance to cast. It doesn't really matter. I mean, going through a lot of these, taunt is actually mildly useful. It just kind of wish that was a higher level. Firestorm again useless. Bolt and Boulder useless. Fissure useless. Most of these are useless unless you're building a character that's actually going to utilize them. The only exception to this is in recent patches I've been coming up with builds that are melee characters that are triggering these effects by using the synergies and beefing them up. They're very specific to those specific classes. So these would only be useful to the actual Druid, with the exception of Twister, which is the only one of the entire lot that is going to be useful to anyone other than the Druid. Because it is the stuns. It gives you stuns. But it's also useful to the Druid too, because the Druid can also synergize the stuns. All of the curses pretty much are useful except for Weaken. Like I said, Weaken is actually not good. And my personal opinion would be to actually remove Weaken, replace it with something else. It really kind of ruins any of these items. If anybody was actually going to use any of these items, it is a very good consideration to not use them because they don't want to override other competing curses. Like, for instance, if I was a character and I had a Reaper's Toll for my mercenary who was using Decrepify, I wouldn't want the Doombringer Champion Sword because the Weaken might potentially override my Decrepify and lower my damage output. And Weaken is not a good enough curse to be overriding anything. Weaken needs to be addressed itself. I wouldn't necessarily say take it from these items, but what I would say is that Weaken needs to be addressed itself so that it's not useless. Confuse, Life Tap, all very good. Very, very nice. Poison Explosion. This is actually an interesting one as a chance to cast, despite the fact that it's a terrible skill and it needs to be addressed. Having a way to destroy corpses like this actually sounds kind of interesting. It's not going to do any damage. And the only thing that it's really going to do for the most part is it's going to destroy corpses. So strictly as a way to destroy corpses, it's an interesting idea, but the Viper Fork Mancatcher is a very bad unique that unfortunately has never really quite been all that good ever since they nerfed poison damage. It used to be okay, I think, before they nerfed poison damage, and then afterward it just kind of went really downhill from there. Bone Spear, again, chance to cast, kind of a weird one. It's actually mildly useful in some chance to cast builds, specifically my Bowenmancer that I made. As a charge, it's terrible. As a chance to cast, it's actually mildly useful. Decrepify, always good to have as a chance to cast because it's something that you have to spam. However, some of these probably could use some help with the percentage. Like even at level 1, it only lasts for 4 seconds, I think it may be less than that. And like things like this probably increase that percent chance a little bit, but a lot of them are actually a decent percent chance. With the exception of the On Death one, which is, I can't even remember the name of it. It's that really high-level mace, two-handed mace. That On Death one is terrible. Lower resist doesn't really matter, but this unique item sucks. Like, it's a good one, but this unique item kind of just not, it's not really the greatest. It was kind of made for Necromancers, which doesn't make much sense, especially considering Necros would just cast lower resist themselves. This one in particular probably could go... I mean, it'd be interesting to see it increased in level or percentage just to see if people would actually use it. But other than that, I don't really know. Poison Nova is kind of nice as a chance to cast because it's only 2 seconds. As a charge, it's terrible because it's only 2 seconds. As a chance to cast, it's okay because you can arrest regeneration with it on a large group of monsters by spamming it. But the percent chance on these is usually really low. Like Plague Bearer has a 5%. Guardian Naga has a 5%. It's really bad. The main issue with both of those is that, well, it's not enough. My big issue with poison damage also is that none of it stacks. So as you can see, they're both kind of like geared toward a character who has poison damage. Plague Bearer is geared toward a Druid that has rabies, and Guardian Naga has poison damage on it already, which means that Guardian Naga and Plague Bearer are basically just going to both overwrite the poison damage that you already have anyway that it's doing. So Poison Nova won't do any damage with these weapons unless the target isn't hit by any of these weapons. Oath Bone Spirit is really kind of stupid. Bone Spirit is nowhere near as good as Bone Spear for spamming because it only hits one target. There's also some problems with Bone Spear when it gets cast like this, is that a lot of the times it spawns behind the target and just misses them completely. They need to work on the way that this ability works, and also, honestly, I'd love to see it replaced with Bone Spear instead of Bone Spirit, because Bone Spirit is just the inferior between the two. Bone Spear actually pierces, and Bone Spirit doesn't. Bone Spirit only hits one target. The damage of them is pretty close, especially when you have like plus the skills and synergies and all that other crap. So like having this on the Oath, I'd like to see it change to Bone Spear maybe. I think that would be a good idea. It wouldn't really change a whole lot because it's still not going to do very much damage. Neither one of them does. But it would be a nice little addition that would make Oath a little bit stronger. Holy Bolt, as a chance to cast, is actually excellent. I've built Godzilla and a bunch of other characters based off of this. It actually does a lot of damage when synergized, even at a relatively low level like this. Honestly, even just level 5 and level 3, because it's 1,000% increase, it's kind of crazy. I would like to see the Laying of Hands one increased maybe to like 20%. Fist of the Heavens, none of these actually work. I've tried them all. The level 4 at 5% is terrible. The level 7 at 5% is terrible. The level 7 at 6% is terrible. They're all terrible. Even the Cloudcrack one, which is the one, Cloudcrack and Goldstrike Arch, which can both be spammed, by the way. And in fact, all of them can be spammed. At 5 to 6%, it's just not enough, and it doesn't go off often enough to be useful. They'd have to bump that up to like 20% to really get good usefulness out of it, or at the very least increase the level of Fist of the Heavens to a point where it's actually useful so that you could actually get good use out of it. Cloudcrack is also a two-handed sword, which makes it very difficult for the Paladin to use because obviously they lose all their benefits from their shield. And one of the things that I'd like to see with this one is that, honestly, they just need to increase the Fist of the Heavens level like a crazy amount. Give it like level friggin' like 30 Fist of the Heavens at a 6% chance, because quite honestly, no one's using that sword anyway. At least give it something special that people could play around with. Goldstrike Arch Gothic Bow is actually pretty well used for the Amazon, but I've actually tried to play around with it on the Paladin, and it's terrible. There's just no way to really utilize it. They could increase the level of the Fist of the Heavens on this one massively as well, because the only character that's really using this bow is the Amazon for the most part, and even in that situation, she's not getting hardly anything out of a level 7 Fist of the Heavens with 5% chance. They could bring it up to a level 30 Fist of the Heavens with a 5% chance, and it still wouldn't really do very much on that bow. But at least it would be something better than the level 7 that's on there right now. Sorceress, Fireball's terrible, and Nova's terrible. Both absolutely terrible on striking. Neither one of those is worthwhile. Charge Ball, again, terrible. Static Field, amazing, because it's utility. In fact, all around the Mulberry Bush, Static Field as a chance to cast is absolutely amazing. Frost Nova is absolutely amazing, because Frost Nova provides chilling effects, and if you want to add chilling effects into your build defensively, helps out a ton to be able to have that either casting on attack or when struck. Or on striking. Ice Blast, same thing, because it freezes. It now is a utility. Very nice. Could be bumped up in level a little bit so that the freeze duration lasts longer. Other than that, not really a whole lot going on there. Fireball, pretty much useless. I did kind of envision a build with a Sorceress using the Enlightenment armor with fully synergized Fireball, but the main issue with it is that, well, to get really a good fully synergized Fireball, it just takes way too many points, and you really can't pull it off. There's also better pieces of equipment to use that would be, get more usefulness in that slot. So Enlightenment just kind of falls to the wayside. Nova, pretty much useless. They're just way too low level, unsynergized. They don't really have good damage. Most of these are terrible. War Strike might be the only one that actually goes off enough to be useful, and even War Strike, not enough. damage. It's only level 9. And because it's only level 9, it basically does nothing. If they brought this up to like level 20, it still wouldn't do very much damage. And the Sorceress still wouldn't even be able to really use it either because Nova is just one of those skills that has to be fully synergized and also has to be maxed out to get really the best damage out of it. And it has to be cast really, really fast. And at a 25% chance at level 9, it's never going to do enough damage to actually be useful. It'll be pretty. That's about it. Lightning. It's one of those ones that I've found mild usefulness in certain builds. My Lightning Thor Barbarian got some pretty good use out of the Wisp Projector. I'm not really sure how much it really adds to my total, but it's just one of a large number of lightning effects that I have going on at any given time. Unsynergized, though, it's never really going to do very much damage. It is a chance to cast on striking, so the Sorceress is never really going to get you good use out of it either unless she does a melee build. For the most part, it's not a high enough percentage, I think. I think the level is okay because it doesn't matter how much you increase the level, it's never really going to do very much damage. But I'd like to see it go off more often. Maybe like a 25% chance would be more interesting. Enchant is always going to be good. The Lava Gauntlets, unfortunately, are kind of just outclassed by all the other enchant sources. Demon Limb is way better. Obviously, enchant from your mercenary is way better. You can also get, I think there's Toad's Fell Flom, which I think is about the same. There's a couple different sources of enchant. They're all just better than Lava Gouts. Lava Gouts level 10 is definitely okay. It's not bad. But I'd like to see Lava Gouts actually compete with some other options, like, for instance, Demon Limb. I'd like to see it compete with Demon Limb. Just simply because you have to actually wear the gloves. There's a lot of really good glove choices. You've got tons and tons of glove choices. You've got like your freaking Drax. You've got really nice crushing blow gloves. There's a lot of different competition in this arena. And the one thing that Lava Gouts are supposed to do, it doesn't really do very well. It doesn't do well enough to give you a compelling reason to use it. So increasing the level here would probably be good. Chain Lightning, again, here we're in a situation where we don't really have enough synergies or damage output. But in my Thor Barbarian, I did find mild usefulness with the Chain Lightning. Now that they've fixed the attack next hit delay on Chain Lightning, it's actually kind of nice. But it's still not going to do a massive amount of damage on the Barbarian. And the Sorceress is really never going to get a good use out of it either. Meteor, it's pretty much useless on all the characters it's on. It really just doesn't do enough damage. And the Sorceress is probably never going to get to use it either. The Blizzard, like I said, mild usefulness just simply as a utility skill, but it's not really enough. It's okay. It's just like a little extra chilling effect on Zakarim's hand. Hydra's completely useless for the most part, especially ever since they changed it. So it used to be that you could cast as many Hydras as you could cast, but there was a really long delay. And what they did was they changed it so you could only cast a maximum number of, I think it was like 6 or whatever, but you can cast them really fast, right? So they did that for the Sorceress, and it's great for the Sorceress, but it's terrible for the proccing skills. And in the process, they actually nerfed Dragon Body Armor, because Dragon Body Armor and Shield used to be able to proc 12 out of 12% chance level 15 Hydras. You could have like an infinite number of them, and it didn't matter that they didn't do very much damage, because you could have like freaking 30 of them on the battlefield, right? Well, now you can only have like 6 max. So they kind of like punched the Hydras in the donkey. Right in the where the sun don't shine, because the chance to cast Hydras have basically been completely nerfed into oblivion. I don't know what they could do to fix it. Maybe they could rescind the limit on non-sorceresses. Maybe if they just made it so that any character that's not a sorceress could cast more than 6. No character that's not a sorceress is going to be able to get good damage out of the anyway. So if you're a chance to cast character and you're trying to utilize this to get good damage out of it, and you're not a sorceress, you're basically like grasping at straws here anyway, and trying to get like 30 really crappy Hydras to all shoot the same target. Frozen Orb is fine how it is. It's a utility skill. Diablo's Firestorm is, I don't even know. It's okay, I guess. It does physical and fire, so it's not bad. And then we move on to Windstruck, which is the last part of this. Now, Windstruck is An interesting one because it's more defensive in nature, so you have to actually get beat up. It does mean that you kind of want to be in there in the thick of it getting beat up. It doesn't really work very well on casters that don't get hit a lot. If you're in the back and you're not really getting hit, if you're a Necromancer and you're all the way at the back of your group, for the most part, like chance to cast when struck, like generally doesn't work very well. Like slow missiles is absolutely great on Peace Body Armor. You do have to get hit, obviously. Fade is great when hit. Mind Blast, it's defensive. Venom is great. Howl, not really as much because obviously you're a melee character and you don't want monsters to run away. I'm not really sure why they put Howl on this Barbarian armor. Barbarians are like the quintessential melee character, and it's like the worst option for them, like known to man. Cyclone armor, great. That one is great. The Twister, that one is great. Tornado, nobody cares. That one sucks. It's all damage, and it doesn't really even do good damage at level 5, so it's terrible. Amplify damage is great. Bone armor is great. Dim vision is great. Weaken is terrible. Needs to be removed pretty much. Replaced with something else, or the weakened skill itself, it needs to be fixed. Iron Maiden is kind of sucky because it overwrites other curses that you might necessarily want. In fact, it actually ruins some items. Like, for instance, the Steel Carapace Shadow Plate. A lot of people have talked about that one as a halfway decent little choice for some stuff. But the problem is it has Iron Maiden, which overwrites Amplified Damage, Decrepify, and other things. The Iron Maiden also, I think, makes it bad manners in PvP. I'm not really sure Iron Maiden as a response is really all the greatest idea for a chance to crash when striking. I mean, I can see why they did it, but honestly, Iron Maiden needs to be fixed if they're really going to keep it like that, because Iron Maiden just really doesn't do what it is supposed to do. Terror is great as a defensive mechanic, and it's really only on the defensive items anyway, so that's fine. Confuse is great as a defensive mechanic also. Bone Prison is kind of annoying on the Armor of King Leoric because it does sometimes get you trapped and killed. I'm not really sure that I like this one. Maybe if it casts it, I don't know, because it casts on the enemy. But the problem is if the enemy's standing next to you, it also casts on you. So I'm not really sure what to do about this one. It's already a really low level, and it's only a 10% chance. But sometimes it can be useful. And if you have teleport, you can always teleport out, which is another thing. But I don't know about this one. I'm not sure what to say. Lower resist, absolutely great as a Windstruck, Medusa's Gaze, and Radaman's, or sorry, what's the other one? The new one, the Plague Sword. Both of those are actually really good. Poison Nova as a Windstruck is actually really terrible. The main reason is because, well, if you're going to use Poison Nova, the only reason to use Poison Nova is to stop regeneration of monsters. And if it's going off when you're getting beat down, it is only going to go off very rarely. And it's not going to actually arrest regeneration like you want. You have to be able to spam it to get good use out of it. It's really just eye candy on these items. All of these items, it's basically just eye candy. There's really no good usefulness out of it. Even Andoriel's Visage. It's basically just going to do nothing for the most part. And even when it does something, that something is going to be imperceptible. Bone Spirits as a chance to cast when struck is really stupid. It is on Arm of King Leoric Wand, but honestly they should beef this up to like freaking level 30 or something, because it doesn't do any damage at level 10. And honestly, even at level 30 it wouldn't do very good damage, but at least it would be something as opposed to what it is right now, which is nothing. Holy Bolt when struck, I've tested it. It's terrible. It just doesn't really work very well. On top of that, the Paladin without a shield, because this is the Bone Slayer Blade Gothic Axe, is absolutely terrible choice. You're basically a raw sponge of a character. You get beat down and you die really quickly. And you don't even really get that many Holy Bolts from it because it's only a 50% chance. They would have to bump this up to 100 to really make it worthwhile, in my opinion. And even then, at 100, it still might not even be worthwhile. Fist of the Heavens, as we talked about earlier, it just has really low percent chances. It doesn't really even do that much damage with these low levels. I don't know why they went with such low levels. They either need to bump the levels up tremendously or bump the percentage chance up tremendously, because they're just not useful. And then finally we come to Sorceress here. Sorceress has Charge Bolt when struck, useless, Frost Shield when struck, which is Frost... That is a Frost Shield. Frost Shield. And then Nova Shield. But then down here it has Frost Nova and Nova. I think that's just the name of the effect. Yeah, that's just the name of the effect. Okay, so Frost Nova, absolutely great because it's actually defensive. It causes chilling effects. It slows down the monsters. It saves your life. On many occasions, if you have some Frost Nova Windstruck, you will save your life. Nova Shield, though, or Nova Windstruck, doesn't save your life. Does nothing. Hydra Shield doesn't really do anything because it's really low level and the monsters basically do nothing. You're just kind of in a weird situation. Charge Bolt, useless. Static Field, useful, right? Static Field's problem is it needs to be spammed, and a lot of these percentages are low, like this low 10% on Hawaiians. I'd like to see the 10% on Hawaiians go up a little bit. Cow Kings is fine at 25%. Although the level of these could probably use a little bit of bumping, like, say, Hawaiians could probably go up to 5, and Cow Kings could probably go up to, like, level 7 or 8 or something like that, would be more effective. And then Frost Nova again. Frost Nova, like I said, is fine no matter what. It's just a really nice defensive. In addition, obviously you don't want it to replace something important, but in addition, it's actually a really nice addition. Unless you're like a barbarian that doesn't want to lose his find item corpses, or a necromancer that doesn't want to lose his, minion corpses. But that's neither here nor there. On top of this, Blaze is actually useful now because they added the run walk speed, so that's kind of nice. I'd like to see the percentage go up a little bit. But other than that, I mean, it's fine. Nova, useless. Firewall, pretty much useless. It does do a little bit of damage if you have it fully synergized. So there was a passive Sorceress that was built around this that basically just sat in the middle of Uber Tristram and actually killed the Ubers utilizing this polearm because every single time you got hit, you would put out a level 17 Firewall. And fully synergized Firewall does pretty good damage. And you would have like tons and tons and tons of Firewalls just stacking all over the place constantly. It's one of the only uses I've ever really seen for the level 17 Firewall that's on the Pride polearm. Other than that, there's really not a lot of good usefulness for it. But as it is, you can see that even something like Firewall, if it's high enough level with a high enough percentage, can actually be useful and make interesting builds. Enchant is useful no matter what, although the Immortal Cade's Sacred Armor only has level 5 with a 5% chance. 5% chance doesn't matter. They swing their weapons really fast. They're going to get it no matter what. Level 5, though, is really low, and it doesn't compete very well with other options like, any other options like Demon Limb is higher, Toad's Fell Flom is higher, Lava Gouts is higher. They're all pretty much higher. I mean, as an option, I guess it's kind of a nice in addition to Immortal King Sacred, Soul Cage Armor. But you could totally have Demon Limb on a swap and replace it with like level 20. Was it level 21 on Demon Limb? You could have Toad's Fell Flom on a swap, and that one I think is level 10. And then you could have like Lava Gouts on swap, and you can have level 10. It's pretty easy to get better enchant than Immortal Kings. It's just a really bad level. They could definitely beef that up a little bit. Immortal Kings could use the help too. Chain Lightning, for the most part, when struck, is actually pretty useless. It's a damage thing. It needs to be spammed to get optimal damage out of it. It needs to be synergized to get optimal damage out of it. Sorceress is the main one that can synergize it. She doesn't want to get hit on a regular basis, so mostly useless. Teleport as a hit effect is actually terrible. A lot of people actually won't even use Oculus Crystal because of it, but it is just something that exists within the game as it's a meme basically at this point. Glacial Spike, when struck, is actually really useful because it's defensive. It'll freeze the targets around you. It's an AoE. Very, very nice. Meteor, pretty much useless. Blizzard, useless. Honestly, in most situations, except for the utility of being able to chill targets. But as a wind struck effect that doesn't go off very often at a 4 and a 5% chance, it's terrible. If they beefed it up a little bit to like a 10 or 15% chance, it would be a lot more useful utility wise. Chilling armor obviously is amazing. And nobody needs to touch that. That thing's ridiculous as a chance to wind struck. Tiamat's Rebuke is a unique item that really needs to be gone over and talked about because it's just really bad. It doesn't really do anywhere near as much damage. The percent chances are really low. The levels are really low. All of it is really low. But the Hydras on it are terrible at level 6 with a 3% chance. You barely will ever get any. And then finally, we have Delirium with the 50% chance to cast the Delirium thing. That's a punishment, so absolutely no problem with being punished. I mean, we could talk about a lot more of this stuff. There's obviously more things that we can talk about with Chance to Cast, but with Chance to Cast, what they really need to do is they really need to go through the process of eliminating a lot of the Felger carb, to use a Battlestar Galactica term, of junk that nobody wants. Isolate it down to the stuff that people actually use, that is actually interesting. Like for instance, remove all the Novas. The Novas are useless. Nobody needs the Novas. The Novas are terrible. There's even more, of course, that I can go over, and I think I missed the random affixes for. Yeah, these are the random affixes right here. So the suffixes and prefixes, suffix, prefix, prefix, suffix. Anything that says prefix, suffix is specifically talking about those skills, and it's just if they went through the process of refining this a little bit, it would make the entire game better too. It would fix itemization even better than what it is right now. Because when you find an item and it comes with, for instance, Nova, like it's just a wasted stat. It's useless. Like nobody wants Nova on a pair of boots. Frost Nova, on the other hand, is actually useful, right? So just remove Nova completely and leave in Frost Nova, so that people that actually want Frost Nova on their equipment have a better chance of getting it, because you're removing the one that nobody actually wants. And this comes down to a lot of stuff like this. There are a lot of different chance to cast abilities that could be worked out and fixed. And let's see here. I mean, for the most part, though, everything pretty much works okay that people actually use, right? And that's what it comes down to, is a lot of people actually, use a lot of these. I mean, how many of you guys have ever used a, like chance to cast lower resistance? That's like a pretty common one now with the plague sword. On top of that, you've got like amplify damage, the brand missile weapon. I've been using that like last season. The confuse is actually really good on Dream. The Dream helmet and Delirium both. Actually, no, does Delirium have it? I don't remember if Delirium has it. But basically, there are a lot of really good ones, and if they kind of narrow down a lot of the crappy ones that no one uses, get them out of the system so that they stop clogging up the rare items and blue items and everything else that could potentially have better stats on them, we'd be in a better situation altogether. I think that pretty much covers everything after an hour and 37 minutes. Blah, 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 blah. It's been a long video, but I think it's been worth it. I'm interested to see what you guys have to say on this. Are you interested in potentially revamping the charge system and the chance to cast system so that they are both more useful within the game? Do you think that revamping the charge system and the chance to cast system will result in, a broader sense of like character building? I think in my personal opinion is that I've built characters around chance to cast, and I've built characters around charges before, and I can definitely see potential for it. If they were to revamp the system a little bit and make things just work better, mesh better, like, eliminate a lot of the crap, beef up the things that actually can be useful, level up the things that have absolutely no purpose, or get rid of them. It's just a matter of trying to see the original purpose of an item, like Metal Grid, for instance, and then understanding that the original purpose of the item hasn't been fulfilled. Metal Grid's original purpose was to give people access to an Iron Golem. It was never fulfilled. It wasn't until Diablo 2 Resurrected that they finally fixed the Iron Golem ability so that it actually transferred in between games. But because of the fact that it's used on all characters and not just the Necromancer, any character that utilizes this for an Iron Golem is also going to need a couple points in Summon Resistance and a couple points in Golem Mastery. So one of the things that they could really do on this to really make it useful is put some O skills on here of +1 Summon Resistance and +1 Golem Mastery. And that would allow other characters besides the Necromancer to get much better use out of the Iron Golem that comes from this necklace. And in this way, and I want to really stress this point, is I'm not trying to change the entire game. I'm trying to fulfill the purpose that the game had. So, like with the Metal Grid, we're trying to fulfill the purpose of the Metal Grid. The purpose wasn't to be useless. Like, I really want to stress that. The purpose of these items was never to be useless. They didn't give you, level 7, 11 level 7 Spirit of Barb charges to be useless to you. They gave you these Spirit of the Barb charges to be useful. And the fact that they are useless is not a direct representation that they meant them to be useless. It's a direct representation that they didn't fulfill their original purpose. And all we're trying to do by fixing the charge system, all we're trying to do by fixing the chance to cast system, so that they work more better, to use some improper English, is to fulfill the original purpose of what they were trying to achieve. And you can't just, change everything willy-nilly and unbalance the entire game, but making the spirits, not die wouldn't exactly be unbalancing the game. It would just make the Wisp Projector useful so that when you use it, it actually, fulfills its purpose. And the sad thing is that, of course, you can only utilize this guy if you have the ring on. So as soon as you take the ring off, you lose the spirit. And that's absolutely fine. But at least make the spirit useful when you're wearing the item. At least make the Iron Golem useful when you're wearing the item. And this is kind of where everything needs to go, is that the charges need to fulfill whatever purpose it was that they were designed for. A very interesting one that I played around with for a long time was the Freezing Arrow on a Holy Freeze Paladin. I actually still, I think, have my Frosty Cheeks. And one of the things that I played around with was utilizing Freezing Arrow gloves, because it was the only place that you could get charges. And if you utilize a Holy Freeze aura with Freezing Arrow gloves, you can actually get some pretty interesting effects. I don't know if I still have my Freezing Arrow gloves. I do. All right, so if I put my Freezing Arrow gloves on with these charges, now 25 charges is not enough, and that's what we were talking about for literally an hour and a half. But if I put my Holy Freeze aura on, and I switch to a bow, and I go out here into the River of Flame with my character, and I utilize these Freezing Arrow charges, I can actually dish out some pretty significant damage. Let me see if I can show you this. So here's a pack of monsters, and I only have a certain amount of charges, unfortunately. But as you can clearly see, I can literally kill these guys in hell difficulty with Freezing Arrow charges. This is the kind of crazy stuff that you can achieve if you actually had a decent number of charges to use, or even just the ability. But look, I'm already out of charges. I killed one pack of monsters with 25 charges. One pack. One pack, and I'm done. And then to repair it, it literally is just going to cost me an arm and a leg every single time. 185,856 for basically what amounted to one pack of monsters. It's terrible. So I hope that they do eventually revamp the charge system. I hope that they do eventually take a look at the chance to cast system. Although I think the chance to cast system is in a much better place than the charge system. It still needs a little bit of love too, for the same reasons that the charge system needs a little bit of love. And overall, I think it will help out the game tremendously. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when I'm just ranting for an hour and 43 minutes on fixing the charge and chance to cast systems. And as always, keep watching.